I sat in that stuffy conference room, pretending to be Joan Henderson, a quiet assistant. I watched as Gerald Tanner, the production manager, puffed out his chest, taking credit for Shirley Briggs' brilliant ideas. He belittled hard-working folks right in front of me, never suspecting that the new girl scribbling notes was Evelyn McAllister, the CEO of the company he was systematically destroying. He had no idea what was coming. Before I continue, drop a comment telling me where you're listening to this from, and if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. You won't want to miss the ending. The first morning I walked through the big glass doors of Home Comforts Textiles, I felt a strange mix of nerves and excitement. It was my company, the one my grandmother started with her own 2 hands, but today, nobody knew who I really was. I wasn't Evelyn McAllister, the new CEO with a fancy office on the top floor. No, today I was Joan Henderson, a brand new entry-level assistant, clutching a rather worn purse and trying to look like I knew exactly where I was going, even though I'd spent the last week studying floor plans and employee handbooks. It wasn't easy, stepping down from the executive suite into the hustle and bustle of the production floor. But I had to. The numbers looked fine on paper mostly, but I could feel it in my bones that something wasn't right. Morale was low, production was slipping, and there was this quiet hum of unhappiness that just didn't add up. My gut told me there was a disconnect, a big one, between the people making the beautiful fabrics and the folks making decisions in the boardrooms. I suspected something was amiss, something hidden in the daily grind that wouldn't show up on any report. So I decided to go find it myself. My outfit was simple, plain slacks, a comfortable blouse, and sturdy, sensible shoes. No designer suits, no expensive jewelry. I even made sure my hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. I wanted to blend in, to become just another face in the crowd. And for the first time in years, I wasn't greeted by the security guard, who usually smiled and nodded. He just gave me a quick professional glance and pointed me toward the visitor's desk, where I signed in with my fake name, Joan. It was a funny feeling, being invisible in a place I owned. It was also incredibly liberating. The production department was a maze of whirring looms and bustling activity. The air was thick with the scent of fabric and the gentle hum of machinery. My job, officially, was to help with inventory and basic administrative duties. I'd be moving around, observing, listening. It was the perfect cover. I was supposed to report to the production manager, Gerald Tanner, but I figured I'd mostly be working with the team on the floor. That was the whole point, wasn't it? To see the company through their eyes, not through my polished CEO lens. As I navigated the narrow aisles trying to find my way to the break room to drop off my lunch bag, I saw him. Gerald Tanner. He stood near a bank of looms, his back to me, talking loudly to a couple of younger employees. Even from a distance, his posture radiated a kind of self-important authority. He gestured expansively, his voice booming over the gentle clatter of the machines. I'd met Gerald in executive meetings, of course. He was always full of grand pronouncements about his team's achievements and innovative solutions, always ready to take credit for whatever success we had. But seeing him here, on the floor, felt different. He looked bigger somehow, more imposing, less polished than he did in the boardroom. He finished his conversation, slapped one of the younger men on the back, a little too hard it seemed, and then turned, beginning to walk briskly down the main aisle. My heart gave a little flutter, a nervous twitch. This was it, my first real encounter with the man I was here to observe. I braced myself, trying to look busy, pretending to study a clipboard I was holding. He walked past me, his eyes fixed straight ahead, a slight, almost imperceptible smirk on his face. He didn't even glance my way, not a flicker of recognition, not a hint that he was walking right past the person who held his entire future in her hands. He just strode by, a gust of confidence trailing behind him, utterly oblivious to the new, quiet assistant who was watching his every move. And I smiled, a small, secret smile. He had no idea. The first few days as Joan Henderson were a bit like learning to walk again, if walking involved navigating enormous rolls of fabric and a rather old-fashioned computer system. I was supposed to be helping with inventory, which sounded simple enough, but the sheer volume and the company's unique, slightly complicated tracking methods meant I was often a step behind. I'd try my best, pushing boxes and scanning labels, but I could feel my fingers fumbling with the unfamiliar software, and sometimes the numbers just wouldn't quite add up. I was so used to seeing reports, not creating them from scratch. It was humbling, to say the least, and a little embarrassing. One afternoon, I was struggling with a particularly stubborn batch of silk blends, trying to enter them into the system. I must have misread a product code because the computer kept spitting out an error message. I sighed, rubbing my temples, wishing I could just call down to IT, but I knew Joan Henderson wouldn't have that kind of access. Just then, I heard a booming voice behind me. "What in the blazes is going on here?" My shoulders tensed. It was Gerald Tanner. He had that particular tone, the one that made your stomach clench, even if you hadn't done anything wrong. I slowly turned, trying to compose myself, my clipboard clutched a little too tightly. "Mr. Tanner," I began, my voice a little shaky. "I'm just having a bit of trouble with this batch. The system isn't accepting the entry." He strode closer, his face already red, his eyes narrowed. He glanced at my screen, then at the boxes around me, and let out a scoff that could peel paint. "Trouble? Henderson, this isn't rocket science. Are you telling me you can't even handle a simple inventory input? Look at this. You've got the wrong code entirely. This isn't even for the silk blends, it's for the woolens." He jabbed a thick finger at my screen, then pointed to the stack of silk boxes. His voice carried, making the few other employees nearby look up from their work, their expressions a mix of pity and fear. I felt a flush creep up my neck. My heart pounded. He was talking to me, Evelyn McAllister, the CEO, as if I were a clueless child. My first instinct was to snap back, to remind him exactly who I was and who owned this company. But I bit my tongue hard. This wasn't about me. This was about observing him, about seeing exactly what kind of manager he truly was, and how he treated the people who kept this company running. Every raised voice, every sneer, every demeaning word was another piece of evidence. I forced myself to nod, to look contrite. "I apologize, Mr. Tanner. I must have made a mistake," I mumbled, trying to keep my eyes on the screen, not on the other workers who were pretending not to listen, but certainly were. I could feel their silent sympathy, their shared experience. He leaned in, his voice dropping slightly, but still loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. "A mistake? Henderson, this isn't a hobby, this is a business. We don't have time for mistakes that cost us precious production time. Honestly, some people just don't have the knack for this kind of work. It's simple attention to detail. Perhaps you're just not cut out for anything more than basic tasks. You're lucky to even have this job. Quite frankly, if this is the level of effort you're going to give..." He shook his head, a look of profound disappointment on his face, as if I had personally let down the entire textile industry. He turned and walked away, his heavy footsteps echoing on the concrete floor, leaving me standing there, my cheeks burning. My hands were still shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the effort of holding myself back. I looked up, and across the aisle I saw Shirley Briggs, one of the kind loom operators, giving me a small, commiserating smile. She just gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shrug, as if to say, "Don't mind him, he's like that." I took a deep breath, telling myself that this humiliation, this public dressing down, was exactly what I needed to see. It solidified everything my gut had been telling me. Gerald Tanner had just sealed his own fate right there in front of everyone. He had no idea how much he was going to regret those words. The afternoon stretched on, long and blurry. My eyes ached from staring at the tiny print on the inventory sheets and the glowing screen. After Gerald's little pep talk from the other day, I was even more determined not to mess up, but the system was just so fiddly. Every time I thought I had a handle on it, a new problem popped up. I was on a particularly difficult shift, trying to reconcile a discrepancy that seemed to vanish and reappear like magic. My head was buzzing, and I was starting to think even my CEO brain couldn't untangle this mess. I missed my fancy office chair, let me tell you. I leaned against a stack of fabric bolts, feeling a little defeated, just wishing for the clock to hit 5. Just as I was about to give up and restart for the 10th time, a soft voice broke through my thoughts. "Having a bit of a wrestle with that old beast, dear?" I looked up. It was Shirley Briggs, her face warm and kind, her hands still dusty from the colourful threads of her loom. She had a gentle smile that reached her eyes, and a comfortable, reassuring way about her. She was older, with silver hair pulled neatly back, and an air of quiet wisdom. She usually worked a few aisles over, and I'd often catch her humming softly to herself as she worked. I gave a tired shrug. "It feels like it's winning," I admitted, pointing at the blinking error message on my screen. Shirley stepped closer, peering at the computer. "Ah, the 7B23 code, is it?" she said, nodding knowingly. "That one's a trickster. The system likes to call it wool blend, but it's actually the cotton-silk mix in disguise, even though the label says otherwise. See, you have to manually override it right here," she explained, gently guiding my hand to the keyboard. "And always put the batch number in twice, just for good measure. It's an old glitch, been around for years. Management never quite got around to fixing it." She chuckled softly, a conspiratorial sound that made me feel instantly at ease. She showed me a few other little shortcuts, the unwritten rules that made all the difference, things you'd never learn from a manual. Her patience was boundless, and her explanations were so clear, so practical. In minutes, the beast was tamed. Later that evening, the shift stretched even longer. We were trying to push out a big order, and everyone was focused, tired, but still plugging away. I was still helping Shirley with her inventory after she finished her loom duties, trying to pay her back for her help. My coffee cup had been empty for hours. Suddenly, Shirley appeared beside me, a steaming mug in her hand. "Here you go, dear," she said, her smile as warm as the coffee itself. "You look like you need a boost, and don't worry, this one's on me." It was a small gesture, just a cup of coffee, but it felt like the biggest kindness I'd received in ages. In that moment, I wasn't the CEO, I was just Joan, a tired co-worker, and Shirley was a guardian angel. I thanked her, feeling a lump in my throat. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the weariness in her eyes, but also the deep, unwavering goodness. It suddenly hit me, clear as day, what kind of treasure these employees were. People like Shirley, working tirelessly, dealing with ancient glitches, and managers like Gerald, and still finding the capacity for such pure, unadulterated kindness. It wasn't just about Gerald taking credit, it was about him stifling these brilliant, dedicated people. My stomach churned with a quiet, fierce resolve. Shirley deserved better. They all deserved better. And I knew right then and there that when the time came, I wouldn't just expose Gerald Tanner's abuses, I would make sure that people like Shirley Briggs were not just protected, but celebrated. And Gerald? He was about to find out exactly what kind of simple assistant he had underestimated. The pieces were all falling into place and the final picture was going to be a shock to him. Life on the production floor as Joan Henderson had opened my eyes in ways Evelyn McAllister, CEO, could never have imagined. I saw the incredible dedication of people like Shirley, who quietly made magic with threads and looms, and I saw the toxic shadow that Gerald Tanner cast over it all. He was always there, a little too loud, a little too pleased with himself, always ready to snatch up credit or assign blame. I'd seen him present Shirley's brilliant suggestion for a more efficient loom setup to the executive team as his latest innovation. I'd watched him publicly shame a young man for a minor miscalculation, making him feel an inch tall, only to quietly adopt the young man's next idea a week later. The pattern was clear as day. One crisp Tuesday morning, the air in the office area felt particularly thick. Gerald called a sudden team meeting, gathering everyone from the production floor who wasn't directly tied to a running machine. We all crowded around a large whiteboard, Gerald standing in front of it, puffing out his chest like a proud rooster. "All right, team," he boomed, his voice echoing a little too much in the enclosed space. "We have a bit of a situation. A rather large discrepancy has come to light regarding the last quarterly inventory report. It seems we're short a significant amount of our premium satin blends. A very expensive oversight. This could jeopardize our contract with the Beaumont department store, a major client." A murmur went through the crowd. Everyone looked worried. I felt a cold knot in my stomach. I had helped with parts of that report, but Gerald himself had insisted on reviewing and finalizing the most sensitive sections, particularly those involving high-value fabrics. He'd even shooed me away from his computer when I offered to double-check his figures. He paused for dramatic effect, letting the fear sink in. Then his eyes, sharp and calculating, landed directly on me. "Henderson," he said, his voice hardening. "You were tasked with a significant portion of the initial data entry for these very fabrics, weren't you?" My blood ran cold. He was setting me up. I knew it. My mind raced back, recalling how he'd hurried me through some sections, how he'd overridden my numbers with his own on 2 separate occasions, scoffing that I was too slow. He had explicitly told me he would handle the final reconciliation for the premium materials. "Yes, Mr. Tanner, but you handled the final review and summation for the premium goods," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but I could feel the heat rising in my face. The injustice was so blatant, so cruel. He let out a dismissive laugh, a sound that grated on my nerves. "Final review, yes, but the initial errors, Henderson, are always the most critical. You put in the wrong figures, didn't you? That's where it all started. Your inattention to detail has led us to this potential catastrophe. This isn't just a mislabeled box. This is a serious financial mistake, and frankly, it looks like gross negligence." He shook his head, looking around at the other employees with an air of long-suffering disappointment. "I regret to say that this level of incompetence is simply unacceptable. We can't afford to have someone so careless handling crucial inventory. I'm afraid this is grounds for immediate termination." My heart pounded, but it wasn't from fear. It was a cold, righteous fury that simmered beneath my carefully constructed persona. Terminate me for his mistakes? The sheer audacity, the brazenness of it was breathtaking. He actually believed he could get away with blaming me for his own monumental screw-up, threatening my job in front of everyone, making me the public scapegoat. He really thought I was just some easily replaceable, quiet little assistant. I looked at the faces around me. Some looked shocked, others pitying. A few nervously avoided my gaze. Shirley, however, met my eyes. Her kind face was etched with a mixture of sadness and a quiet fire, a shared understanding of what was truly happening. I knew she had seen his manipulation too. A quiet calm settled over me. This was it. This was the final straw, the ultimate act of disrespect and abuse. He had pushed me too far, and he had no idea that the simple assistant he was trying to fire was the very person who held the power to bring his entire charade crashing down. He had just handed me the last piece of the puzzle I needed. The game was over. The time for the final test had come, and Gerald Tanner was about to get a lesson he would never, ever forget. The air in the break room was thick with unspoken tension after Gerald's tirade. Everyone was quietly eating their lunch, or pretending to, casting furtive glances my way. I felt a dozen pairs of eyes on me, all filled with that uncomfortable mix of pity and relief that it wasn't them. Gerald, however, was nowhere to be seen. He'd stormed off, leaving me to stew in the humiliation he'd so carefully orchestrated. I knew with absolute certainty that he wanted to see me broken, to confirm his narrative that I was incompetent and easily discarded. But I wasn't broken. I was simmering. A quiet, steady heat was building inside me, firming my resolve. I decided then and there that I would give him one last chance, one final clear opportunity to show an ounce of integrity. I wouldn't do it publicly, not in front of the whole team. I would corner him quietly and offer him a way out, a chance to simply tell the truth, even if it was just to me. If he couldn't even manage that, then he truly was beyond saving. After lunch, I found him in his office, a small, glass-walled space tucked away in a corner of the production area. He was on the phone, laughing loudly, completely unbothered by the crisis he'd just manufactured. I waited patiently until he hung up, then knocked gently on the glass. He looked up, his smile vanishing as he saw me. He gestured for me to come in, his expression already one of bored irritation. "What is it, Henderson? I'm rather busy, as you can see, dealing with the fallout from certain situations," he said, leaning back in his chair, making situations sound like it was my fault. I walked in, closing the door softly behind me. "Mr. Tanner," I began, trying to keep my voice even, "about the satin blends. I've been racking my brain, trying to understand where I could have gone so wrong." I paused, letting my gaze drift to his computer screen, where a spreadsheet was still open. I just remember being particularly confused about the Celeste Blue satin. "You mentioned that batch needed a very specific manual adjustment, a different code entirely, because the automated system kept miscategorizing it. I remember you saying you would take care of that specific override yourself, since it was such a high-value item and the system was being stubborn." I looked at him, my eyes wide, pretending to be utterly bewildered. This was it. This was his chance. He could simply say, "Yes, Joan, I did handle that one, and perhaps I made an error." He could admit to a mistake, even a small one, and start to untangle the mess he'd created. He could choose to be honest just once. And since you've made it this far, go ahead and hit that like button. It really helps me keep bringing stories like this. His eyes narrowed, not with recognition or remorse, but with a flicker of something cold and calculating. "Henderson," he said, his voice flat, "I handle dozens of overrides and adjustments every week. I can't be expected to remember every little nuance. Besides, I distinctly recall giving you clear instructions on that batch. If you misinterpreted them, that's hardly my responsibility, is it? It's called following directions, dear, a basic skill. I told you I would review your entry, not do your entry. There's a big difference, and frankly, your memory seems rather selective when it suits you. This isn't about one particular batch. It's about a pattern of carelessness, as I said." He waved a dismissive hand, a clear sign that the conversation was over. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have important calls to make." I stood there for a moment longer, looking at him, truly seeing him. There was no flicker of humanity, no hint of regret, just a hardened refusal to take any responsibility. He had not only failed the test, he had doubled down, blaming me yet again, twisting the truth even when given a private, face-saving escape. A quiet, almost imperceptible nod passed between me and myself. My decision was made. Gerald Tanner had just written the final chapter of his career at Home Comforts Textiles, and he didn't even know it. He had sealed his own fate, and the grand reveal was going to be an experience he would never, ever forget. That morning, I woke up feeling a familiar hum of anticipation, but it was different this time. It wasn't the nervous flutter of starting a new undercover role. It was the quiet, steely resolve of finishing one. I had spent weeks as Joan Henderson, pushing inventory carts and learning the true heart of Home Comforts Textiles. Now, it was time for Evelyn McAllister to return. I went to my private office first, the one on the top floor that had sat mostly empty while I was playing my part. I hung my sensible Joan Henderson slacks and blouse in the closet, a quiet farewell to my alter ego. Then I pulled out my own clothes. It wasn't just a suit, it was a statement. A sharp, charcoal grey suit, tailored to perfection, with a silk blouse the colour of a winter sky. I put on my good watch, the one my grandmother had given me, and slipped on a pair of elegant, but still comfortable heels. I styled my hair, not in a simple ponytail, but in a sleek, professional bob. As I looked in the mirror, the transformation was complete. The tired, slightly stooped posture of Joan Henderson was gone, replaced by the confident, upright stance of Evelyn McAllister, CEO. It was the same face, yes, but the energy was entirely different. There was a newfound sharpness in my eyes, a quiet power that hadn't been there before. I wasn't just the CEO anymore. I was the CEO who knew. The quarterly executive board meeting was already underway in the elegant, oak-panelled boardroom. I could hear the muted murmur of voices as I approached the heavy double doors. My assistant, bless her heart, had been given strict instructions to let me know the precise moment Gerald Tanner began his production successes presentation. I didn't want to miss a single moment of his inflated self-praise. She gave me a discreet nod, confirming he was indeed in full swing. I took a deep breath, letting the newfound confidence settle deep in my bones. I pushed open the doors and walked in. All conversation stopped. Every head in the room turned. Gerald Tanner was standing at the head of the long mahogany table, mid-sentence, a smug smile plastered across his face as he gestured toward a chart on the big screen. He was talking about his team's exceptional efforts and how his innovative strategies had solved the recent production delays. His eyes, full of self-importance, were scanning the room, clearly expecting praise. As I walked slowly but purposefully to the head of the table, directly opposite him, the other department heads and board members shifted in their seats. There were polite greetings, murmurs of, "Evelyn, you're here," and a few looks of genuine surprise. I offered a warm, polite smile to everyone, but my gaze, when it settled, was fixed entirely on Gerald. His smile had faltered the moment I walked in. First, a flicker of confusion crossed his face. Then a hint of annoyance, as if my unexpected arrival was interrupting his moment in the spotlight. He probably thought I was just late for my own meeting. His eyes, still slightly narrowed, moved from my sharp suit to my styled hair, then slowly, hesitantly, up to my face. The face he had seen every day for weeks, the face he had publicly shamed, the face he had dismissed as incompetent. For a long, agonizing moment, his brain visibly struggled to connect the dots. The Joan Henderson he knew was a quiet assistant, always dressed plainly, perpetually a little flustered. The woman standing before him, radiating an undeniable aura of authority, Couldn't possibly be her. Could she? I watched him, a calm, almost serene expression on my face, giving him all the time he needed. I saw the recognition slowly dawn in his eyes, like a cold wave washing over him. His mouth, which had been open to deliver another self-congratulatory remark, slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to sag. The colour drained from his face, leaving it ashen and pale, like all the blood had suddenly rushed out of it. His eyes, wide with dawning horror, met mine, and in that instant he finally knew who I was. The colour had drained from Gerald Tanner's face, leaving him looking as if he'd just seen a ghost. His jaw hung open, his eyes wide and vacant. He stood there, frozen, a picture of absolute terror and disbelief. The room, which had been buzzing with his self-important voice just moments before, fell utterly silent. You could have heard a pin drop if anyone had dared to breathe. All eyes were on him, then on me, then back to him, as the realization slowly dawned on the other executives. There were gasps, hushed whispers, and then more profound silence. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, letting him truly see me, letting the full weight of the truth settle on him. I watched as his brain visibly struggled, frantically trying to reconcile the woman he had belittled, the woman he had openly threatened to fire, with the CEO now standing before him. It was a beautiful, awful thing to witness, like watching a puppet master suddenly realize his strings were cut. His lips finally moved, but no sound came out. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Evelyn!" he stammered, the name a strangled whisper, as if he couldn't quite believe it was real. Then a forced, uncomfortable chuckle escaped him. "Well, what a surprise! I didn't realize you were joining us today. This is quite a dramatic entrance, I must say." He tried to regain his composure, to puff out his chest again, but it was a pathetic, deflated effort. His hands began to tremble, just slightly, as he gripped the edge of the mahogany table. He cleared his throat, trying to sound confident. "You know, I had a feeling, a hunch, you might say, that someone was observing our operations very closely. It's part of my management philosophy, you see, to welcome scrutiny. It keeps everyone on their toes. I was merely testing her mettle. It's a very rigorous process to see how new employees handle pressure. A very hands-on approach, essential for truly understanding the nuances of the production floor. And Evelyn, well, she certainly proved herself a real trooper. He was trying to spin it, trying to make it sound like he was in on my secret, or that his abusive behavior was just some kind of strategic test. My expression remained neutral, a polite, almost imperceptible tilt of my head. I didn't give him an inch. The other board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their faces a mixture of bewilderment and growing understanding. They knew a desperate lie when they heard one. "The inventory situation, for instance," Gerald continued, his voice growing higher, more frantic. "A calculated risk, really, to identify weaknesses in our protocols. Evelyn, was simply part of that strategic assessment, a brilliant move, actually, for the CEO, to personally observe the front lines, a brilliant, brilliant strategy." He even managed a tight, strained smile, trying to make eye contact with some of the other board members, hoping for a flicker of reassurance. He got none. The silence that followed his rambling was deafening. It stretched, thick and heavy, filling every corner of the elegant boardroom. He looked around wildly, his eyes darting, pleading for someone, anyone, to come to his rescue. But no one did. They just watched me, Finally, I spoke. My voice was quiet, calm, but it cut through the air like a perfectly honed blade. It was the voice of Evelyn McAllister, the CEO, not Joan Henderson, the frightened assistant. "Gerald," I said, my gaze steady, meeting his, holding him captive. "Can you explain to the board why you terminated Joan Henderson this morning for gross negligence regarding the Celeste Blue satin inventory when you personally entered the incorrect override code for that very batch just last week?" Gerald Tanner's face went from ashen to a ghastly shade of green. He stammered, trying to find words, but all that came out was a choking sound. He looked utterly bewildered, like a deer caught in headlights, trapped by his own colossal lies. I don't know what you're talking about, Evelyn," he finally managed, his voice raspy. He made a desperate attempt to glare, but it fell flat, dissolving into a weak tremor. That's a ridiculous accusation. I would never. I merely oversaw the inventory. Joan was responsible for the entries." I simply held his gaze, a calm, steady light in my eyes. "Actually, Gerald, I have the system logs from that night. They show your login at 7:03 p.m. on Tuesday the 14th, directly after I left the department. They also show the subsequent manual change to the Celeste Blue satin coding, overriding my initial correct entry. And then, the next morning, you initiated the public outcry, conveniently blaming the new assistant for the very discrepancy you created." A collective gasp rippled around the room. The other executives exchanged shocked glances, their faces mirroring a mix of disbelief and dawning comprehension. They knew Gerald's bluster, but this level of calculated deception was something else entirely. I turned slightly, addressing the full board. "While I was here, disguised as Joan Henderson, I experienced firsthand the issues that have been plaguing our production department. Gerald, your behavior wasn't just a test or a strategic assessment. It was a pattern of intimidation, manipulation, and outright fraud." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. "I have a detailed report here," I said, picking up a slim folder from the table beside me. "It includes a meticulous log of all my observations. Not only did you consistently take credit for the brilliant ideas of your subordinates, such as Shirley Briggs's improved loom efficiency system, but you also regularly belittled employees for minor errors, creating a climate of fear. I have personal accounts from multiple staff members, including the young man you shamed last month, whose subsequent innovative suggestion you later presented as your own." My voice, though still calm, gained a firm edge. "I also have records of you assigning the most difficult shifts and undesirable tasks to employees you personally disliked, those who dared to challenge your authority. This led directly to burnout and resentment, contributing significantly to our slipping production numbers and low morale. Our employees were afraid to speak up, to offer improvements, to contribute their full potential because of the environment you cultivated." Gerald was sweating, visibly shaking now. He tried to interrupt, to protest, but I raised a hand, stopping him cold. "And finally, Gerald, the Celeste Blue satin, your deliberate manipulation of the inventory and your attempt to scapegoat me was not only an act of gross professional misconduct, but also a direct threat to a crucial client relationship. This isn't just about a few missing numbers, it's about a complete disregard for the integrity of this company and the well-being of its people." I looked him directly in the eye again. "This company, Gerald, thrives on respect, on innovation, and on the hard work of every single person, from the loom operators to the executive team. Your actions have systematically undermined all of that." I closed the folder with a soft click, the sound echoing in the silent room. "Therefore, effective immediately, your employment with Home Comforts Textiles is terminated. Security will escort you from the premises and your access to all company systems will be revoked." Gerald just stared, his mouth opening and closing uselessly. He looked utterly defeated, a pathetic shadow of the arrogant man who had strutted through the factory floor just hours before. The board members, their faces grim, nodded in solemn agreement. The room, once filled with his bluster, now hummed with a quiet, undeniable sense of justice. They understood, they truly understood. The door closed with a soft thud as security escorted Gerald Tanner from the boardroom. The lingering tension in the room began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet, almost stunned relief. The other executives sat in silence for a moment, absorbing what had just happened, their faces a mixture of solemnity and a subtle satisfaction. I could see the unspoken understanding in their eyes. They knew this change was long overdue. I took a moment to compose myself, straightening the papers on the table. My gaze swept over the remaining faces, acknowledging their presence, their role in the company. Then I turned to my assistant, who had re-entered the room. "Please ask Shirley Briggs to come in if she's available," I said, my voice gentle but clear. A few eyebrows rose around the table. Shirley Briggs was a loom operator, a floor employee. Why would the CEO call her into a high-level executive meeting immediately after firing a top manager? It was an unusual request, to say the least, but they simply nodded, curious. A few minutes later, the heavy doors opened again, and Shirley Briggs stepped hesitantly into the room. She was wearing her usual work clothes, a practical apron over a simple blouse, her silver hair neatly tucked back. Her eyes, usually so warm and bright, held a mix of confusion and apprehension. She glanced nervously at the empty chair where Gerald had been, then at the stern faces of the executives, and finally her gaze settled on me. I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes, a dawning understanding. She must have heard the whispers, seen the commotion, but still the deep surprise was evident. "Evelyn?" she murmured, almost a question, her voice soft. I offered her a warm, genuine smile, a smile that was all Evelyn McAllister, but also held the quiet gratitude of Joan Henderson. "Hello, Shirley," I said, my voice softening further. "Please, come in and sit down." I gestured to a chair near me at the table. She walked slowly, carefully, as if afraid to make a sound, and sat on the edge of the chair, her hands clasped in her lap. Her eyes darted from me to the other executives, still trying to make sense of why she, a loom operator, was sitting in the hallowed boardroom. "Shirley," I began, leaning forward slightly, making sure my voice carried a sense of sincere warmth. "You might know me better as Joan Henderson. I was the new assistant in your department for the past few weeks." Her eyes widened, a look of profound astonishment spreading across her face. Her mouth opened in a silent gasp, and then a small, knowing smile slowly began to form, a mixture of surprise and understanding. "Joan," she whispered, a soft laugh escaping her lips. "Well, I'll be. You certainly kept that under wraps, dear." I chuckled. "It was necessary, Shirley. And it allowed me to see things, to experience things that I never would have from my office upstairs. Things like the struggle with that old inventory system, for instance. Do you remember when I was wrestling with the 7B23 code and it kept rejecting the silk blend entry?" She nodded, a faint blush rising on her cheeks. "Oh, that old glitch. That one's a proper nuisance." "Indeed," I agreed. I was completely stuck. And Gerald Tanner had just finished giving me a rather public dressing down, making me feel quite small for my inattention to detail. I met her gaze, remembering her kind, commiserating smile that day. "But you, Shirley, you came over. You patiently explained the workaround, the unwritten rules, how the system mistakenly categorizes the cotton-silk mix. You took me under your wing without a second thought." Her expression softened, remembering the moment. "And then, a few days later," I continued, my voice imbued with genuine affection. During that impossibly long evening shift when my coffee cup had been empty for hours, you brought me a fresh, steaming mug. You said, "You look like you need a boost, dear. This one's on me." It was a small gesture, Shirley, but it meant the world to me. It showed me the true heart of this company, the kindness and the genuine care that thrives here, despite everything. I paused, letting the emotion of the moment settle. While Gerald Tanner was focused on taking credit and creating a climate of fear, you were focused on helping a struggling co-worker, sharing your valuable knowledge and showing incredible generosity of spirit. You saw Joan Henderson, a tired, overwhelmed assistant, and you treated her with dignity and compassion. Shirley's eyes were glistening now, and she nodded, unable to speak, her hands still clasped, but a quiet pride beginning to shine through her surprise. I smiled, a warmth spreading through me. That kind of integrity, that kind of quiet leadership, is what Home Comforts Textiles needs more of. So Shirley, I want to offer you a new role. I'd like you to become our new floor supervisor, overseeing a team, ensuring that your knowledge is shared and that every employee feels valued and respected. I believe your wisdom, your experience, and most importantly, your kindness will be absolutely invaluable in rebuilding morale and fostering true innovation here. Shirley's face crumpled then, tears finally spilling over. She didn't say anything, but her eyes, brimming with emotion, spoke volumes. She was no longer just a loom operator, no longer just a kind co-worker. She was seen, she was valued, and she was about to help shape the future of the company she loved. As she rose, still wiping her eyes, the transformation was evident. She walked out of that boardroom a changed woman, lighter, taller, filled with a quiet sense of purpose, ready to bring her warmth and wisdom to a brand new role. After Shirley left the boardroom, a quiet, almost reverent atmosphere settled over us. It was a good feeling, a clean feeling, like sweeping away dust that had been gathering for far too long. The other executives knew things would be different now. They saw it in my eyes, and they saw it in the tears of joy on Shirley's face. Stepping back into my own shoes, Evelyn McAllister felt profoundly different after my time as Joan Henderson. It wasn't just a change of clothes or a title. It was a shift in how I saw the world, and especially how I saw Home Comforts Textiles. For weeks I had walked those floors not as the CEO, but as just another pair of hands. I pushed carts. I struggled with the stubborn inventory system. I felt the cold sting of Gerald Tanner's public shaming, and I experienced the simple, profound kindness of people like Shirley. What I learned, truly, was that the heart of any company isn't in the reports or the boardroom presentations. It's in the quiet dedication of the people who show up every day, doing the vital, often unseen work. I saw the invisible hands that held everything up. The meticulous way Shirley threaded a loom, the patience of an employee explaining a process to a fumbling newbie like Joan. The shared knowing glance when Gerald walked by, creating his little ripples of fear. These were the true foundations. Power, I realized, isn't about dominance or making others feel small. Gerald thought he was powerful, puffing out his chest, taking credit and throwing blame. But his power was fragile, built on fear and deception. It crumbled the moment the light of truth shone on it. True power, I now understood, was the strength to listen, to observe, to acknowledge the contributions of every single person, and to lift them up. It was seeing someone struggling with a faulty system and offering a helping hand, like Shirley did for me, rather than scolding them for their perceived incompetence. That cup of coffee Shirley brought me, that small, warm gesture on a long, difficult shift, taught me more about leadership than any business book ever could. It taught me about humanity, about the dignity of work, and the importance of recognizing the quiet heroes who keep the wheels turning. When I walked in as Evelyn McAllister that morning, I wasn't just exposing one bad manager. I was affirming a new kind of leadership, one built on respect, empathy, and genuine appreciation. I wanted every person in Home Comforts Textiles to feel seen, to feel valued, to know that their ideas mattered and that their struggles were heard. It was a tough lesson for Gerald Tanner, and I imagine he still can't quite believe that the quiet, clumsy assistant he tried to fire was the person who ultimately held his fate in her hands. But it was a priceless lesson for me. It reminded me that every single person, no matter their role, deserves to be treated with respect and dignity, because you never truly know who you're talking to or what quiet strength they hold or what kind of secret fire burns within them. And sometimes the person you think can't fight back is the very one who's about to change everything. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Your support is what brings these stories to more people.